Some good cake. Yo guys, welcome back to the channel. So since my last vlog, a lot has happened. I finished my first year of medical school, finished the exams, and I got my results the other day. Your boy has passed, so I'll be progressing on to my second year. And it's pretty weird to think that I'm already a quarter of my way through medical school. In this video though, I will be talking about the section 1 of the GAMSAT. So I made a video on section 3, which you guys loved. I made a video on section 2 as well, which a lot of you said was helpful. So I thought might as well make a video on section 1. Now before we start though, let me just say this. My section 1 score was always pretty trash. Now all of you know that I sat the GAMSAT 5 times, but my section 1 was basically pretty trash from the get-go. But towards the end, my final score was a 61, which if you know anything about the GAMSAT is not an amazing section 1 score, but I think what we're going to focus on today is the difference from my first sit to my last sit. So in my first couple sits, my section 1 score was around 49 to a 50. On my last sit, I got a 61. So that's about a difference of 12 points, and I'll kind of try to reflect on what I did to bridge that gap. By the way, you only need about 2 of the 3 sections to be good, and then one of them could get away with being not amazing, but also not like super trash. So that was section 1 for me. Section 1 I found was always quite ambiguous, and I knew that was the section I probably couldn't bank on to be amazing. So I mean, a 61 for me did the job because my section 3 and section 2 were able to pull a lot of the weight. Okay, it's turning into a bit of a flex, but let's jump into section 1. Before we start, let's talk a bit about what section 1 really is. So section 1 of the GAMSAT is about comprehension. It's about reading text, it's about reading poetry, or it's about interpreting cartoons and then answering questions related to that piece of literature or piece of art. I think if you're a person who's been growing up, reading a lot of books, have been enjoying that kind of literature, knows how to interpret a poem, knows how to not only laugh at a cartoon, but also take out the bigger message in these magazines, section 1 should be good for you. I was not that person. The most books I read were almost all fiction, so I was really not used to reading a lot of the technical texts that come up in the GAMSAT. And even for the fiction, I mean, the level of analysis that the GAMSAT requires, I really struggle with it. Now here's my top 3 things that I did to bridge this gap for section 1 of the GAMSAT. The main thing that I changed going from my first sit to my 5th sit was, instead of doing more and more questions, I decreased the number of questions I did and I focused more on reflection. Now, if you saw my section 3 video, you know I went on and on about how important it is to reflect on those heavily analytical questions for section 3. And it's broadly the same for section 1. When I talk about reflection, it's not just about reading the solutions and understanding the correct answer and thinking, okay, now I get why this answer is correct. You might think that's you reflecting on that question. Not really. A good reflector would then think, why didn't I reach the correct answer? So you've got, say in a question you get a question wrong. It's not just about, I got this wrong, here's the correct answer, makes sense. It's more about which parts of the frameworks of thinking did I miss. For example, did I miss an important keyword? Did I misunderstand the meaning of a word? Or did I skim read too quickly that I missed the entire contention of the author? Or is there more of a deeper problem where my comprehension skills are just not as analytical as the GAMSAT need? And that's broadly the same for a question you get correct as well. If you get a question right, that's amazing, but that shouldn't be the end and then you move on to find a question you got wrong. You should reflect on the questions you got right as well, to think, okay, I got this question right, but then why did I get this right? Is my framework of thinking correct, or did I just get lucky? Reflecting on the section 1 of the GAMSAT, you'll slowly start seeing trends on which types of text you're struggling with. There's mainly 4 types of medium for section 1. There's fiction, there's technical text, there's cartoons, and then there's poetry. So for example, if you reflect and you see you're just getting all the poetry questions wrong, well, that should be a red flag. And because you're reflecting, you know which exact part of the process you're going wrong with, and that's the thing that you could target. The best way to reflect is to use some sort of notebook or some sort of log where you're logging each question and writing down why you got it right or why you got it wrong. The next big thing that I changed going from my first sit to my last sit relates to how do you bridge that gap, right? If you have not been reading a lot of books, have not been reading a lot of poetry, or have not just been consuming a lot of the medium that section 1 uses, how do you bridge that gap? The first couple sits, my idea of this was reading a lot more leading up to the GAMSAT. So reading maybe novels, reading more poetry, or just trying to read just a lot more text. I was just reading at all times, thinking that if I read a lot, that gap in skills or that gap in analysis will be bridged. That's not the case. For my last set, what I did was, instead of reading full books, instead of reading huge articles, what I started doing is reading just like a paragraph or 2 paragraphs from random pieces of text. And that's so much better than like getting yourself involved in an entire novel. At that point, you're just reading it for entertainment, like you don't really care about the GAMSAT. In the GAMSAT, you only get a paragraph, 2 paragraphs. And the things I focused on when reading these short pieces of text has nothing to do with am I understanding it. It's a lot more about at what point of this text am I getting lost? At what point of this text am I misinterpreting it? And then figuring out why that is. For example, I found myself reading these short journal articles, maybe just the abstract or maybe a couple paragraphs from the introduction, and then sometimes I would find myself getting lost, just as I did in section 1. And I would ask myself, why did I just get lost? And it was usually because either I have no idea what the sentence before meant, and so my brain had shut down basically, and I was just reading like a machine, or it was mainly a vocabulary problem where I didn't know the meaning of a word, and then again my brain was like, okay, I'm kind of screwed for this. There's no point even thinking about this. And on when you know what was going wrong by reading these little pieces of text, then you can start targeting those soft comprehension skills that section 1 requires. For example, if there's a gap in your vocabulary, don't just pull out the dictionary. Use apps like Elevate. There's a few other apps that test your vocabulary, and that's a way you could kind of bridge those soft kind of skills for comprehension. Third biggest thing that I changed going again from my first GAMSAT sit to my 5th GAMSAT sit for section 1 is stepwise progression. The first couple sits, my mindset was, let's just do these questions in timed condition, and if I do this enough times, I should be getting better. That makes logical sense. And that roughly does. If you practice under time condition over time, you are more likely to get better and better at those questions. But what I found helped me most when you're 3 months out, or even say 2 months out from the exam, literally spend 20 minutes, 25 minutes on a question if you need, and then start decreasing the time progressively instead of trying to do every single question in 1.5 minutes. Let me tell you why this makes sense. When you're adding this time constraint, which I think is very important, but we'll get to that, to you solving this question, what's going to happen is you're adding this new factor on that's going to impact your accuracy. So instead of it just being the way you're thinking, there's also this new factor of time that's impacting whether you get a question correct or not. Now, when you're preparing for a test, what you're trying to figure out is what's going wrong in your framework of thinking. So what I would recommend is, if there's enough time left till the GAMSAT, don't worry about time. Start with giving yourself a lot of time to see, is there any point in time where you do get this question right, or do you just not get this question right for any amount of time? That's going to give you a good indicator of whether it's an accuracy issue or whether it's a timing issue. Now, if it's a timing issue, that's really easy to fix. You start off by giving yourself 10 minutes, cut it down to 7 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 1.5 minutes by March. There's a lot of time to bridge that gap. Now, the other side of this could be you have enough time, but you never get this question correct. And that will require you to kind of troubleshoot a little bit deeper, figure out why that is, that even if you have enough time, you're not solving this. If you've got enough time, my biggest tip will be use stepwise progression for section 1 of the GAMSAT, and broadly you can do that for section 3 as well. That's what I did, and that pushed my marks over 12 points. And I feel like if I focused a bit more on section 1 than section 3, I feel like that would have gone up a bit more as well. But I mean, section 1 is always going to be that section that will remain a bit ambiguous. It is what it is. Just run with it. Alright guys, those were my main top 3 tips for section 1 of the GAMSAT. Those are the 3 things that I did. Just to summarize, the number 1 thing that I changed was, instead of doing more and more questions, I did less questions but spent more time reflecting. The second thing that I did is, instead of just reading books, trying to get better in comprehension just by brute force, I started reading short pieces of text, but again, reflecting on what point of the text am I getting lost. And number 3, stepwise progression, I think is very underrated. in terms of time. Time yourself, of course. By March, any question you do should be timed. But if you're 2 or 3 months out, focus on stepwise progression. You have that luxury of there being a lot of months left before the test, so use it properly, use it to your advantage, and you should be fine. One of the GAMSAT will always remain ambiguous. We can't do anything about that. You could come out of section 1 thinking you killed it and then get a 40, or you could come out of it thinking, okay, I completely screwed that up, and then you get a 70. It's just one of those sections. It's the game we're playing. But I think if you follow these tips, hopefully it works for you, and you have a little bit more of a control of your score, of your preparation for section 1. Let me know if this video is helpful. Follow me on Instagram for more updates on medical school and the GAMSAT. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. I'll be pushing out more GAMSAT content as the March exam comes out. I'm also thinking of making some videos on productivity and my productivity workflow on my iPad, etc. Let me know what you guys think. Otherwise, it's good to be back, and I'll see you guys in the next one.